Hello, my name is Marta and today I will be your guide in the second installment of our meetings with history online. The border change in the west came with consequences in the east, as Polish eastern territories were incorporated into the USSR and now are parts of countries like Ukraine, Belarus and others. That, along with other issues like the terror on the hands of the Soviet army, overcrowding and destruction in many parts of the country, spurred huge migrations and expulsions. There were many Germans living on the western territories incorporated into Poland that were being transported, or in some cases herded, towards the new Polish-German border. Their place was taken by Poles arriving from the east and the central parts of Poland, as well as people coming back from abroad, especially from the USSR and Western Europe. A plan for a quick and orderly migration that was developed by the State Repatriation Office was impossible to execute. There were simply too many people and too little resources. The transports were organized chaotically. Despite there being a final station, you never actually knew where you would get off, or how long would the journey take, or what to take for the journey. Would the train arrive at its station before the snow would fall, or would it stand in the fields for days while the sun scorched everybody's neck? The time spent in train cars would sometimes decide between life and death, as the migrants were transported in cars designed to transport cargo or cattle, just like the one we are in right now. And ours is luxurious. It has a roof. After weeks upon weeks of crowding in train cars with tens of other people, the repatriates, as the propaganda called them, finally arrived at their final destination. A destination vastly different to what they were used to. Not only was it a city, but also a terribly destroyed one. Wrocław, or Breslau, as it is called in German, didn't feel the toll of the war until fairly late. It wasn't until 1944 that the city was expected to hold off enemy forces. The city was declared a fortress, Festung Breslau, on September 25, 1944, and finally capitulated 4 days after Berlin on May 6, 1945. After the Red Army took hold of it, 75% of the urban tissue was destroyed and some 170,000 civilians were dead. A lot of the migrants chose countryside first. They traveled to villages close and far to start a new life in surroundings at least somewhat familiar to what they were used to. However, there were also people who decided to stay in the city, and those people had to deal with all the difficulties that came with it. The city was foreign, and people sometimes had to decide whether to go left or to go right just by guessing. It was also full of mines, looters, and rogue soldiers. A Polish administrative group that arrived in the city at the beginning of May 1945 had to organize life in the city and somehow provide food, shelter, water, gas, and electricity to the seemingly never-ending flow of people arriving in Wrocław. They succeeded in that. However, that did not mean the end of their worries. For example, people wanted, needed, and expected Polish priests to provide comfort and help to the new citizens of Wrocław. But it wasn't that easy. Wrocław belonged to Poland only by the word of Stalin, and that did not change the administrative borders of the German Catholic Church, to which Wrocław still belonged. Looting was also an issue for a couple of years after the war. There were not only civilian looting groups, but also Soviet looting battalions that dismantled everything they possibly could and transported it to the USSR. Unfortunately, Polish administration also had its part in it, as Wrocław was to become the largest brick reservoir in Poland that provided brick to rebuild Warsaw and other cities. There were orphans and half-orphans roaming the streets, people posting flyers on walls looking for their loved ones lost in the war, and people rebuilding the city they decided to make theirs while making sure that its German heritage would be destroyed. The Wild West, as the Western territories were sometimes called, were dangerous and sometimes uninviting, yet they provided many people with a chance of a new life after the tumultuous years of war. On the conference of the Big Three in Yalta, it was decided that a free election was supposed to be organized in Poland as soon as possible. Before any election was organized, however, the communist authorities started to eradicate the anti-communist underground, as well as the process of weakening any legal opposition. Additionally, in 1946, the communists organized a so-called people's referendum, with questions designed specifically to answer yes. The questions regarded abolishing the Senate, consolidation of the economic system based on nationalization of industry and agricultural reform, as well as consolidation of the new western border. The opposition, along with its leader Stanisław Mikołajczyk, were not in favor of abolishing the Senate. Therefore, they strongly encouraged the Poles to answer no for the first question. And their struggle paid off. Only 30% of people answered yes to the first question, and only over 40% yes to the second. However, that did not matter. The communists simply falsified the results that they did not like. This did not bring any reaction from abroad, so the communists felt confident that they could do the same with the elections in 1947. And they did just that. They falsified the results on every level, and they terrorized the opposition, sidelining it and thus gaining full power in Poland. A symbolic end of the period of consolidating power by the communist authorities and taking control over every aspect of people's lives was the exhibition of regained territories. Organized in Wrocław's Centennial Hall, appropriately renamed by the communists to People's Hall, in the summer of 1948 was designed to show the world how well the Poles were settling in on the land that, according to propaganda, came back to the motherland after centuries of Germanization. Later on, however, it became more of an anti-imperialistic event. However, that did not change the fact that people poured into Wrocław, a temporary capital of the country, to see its rebuilt beauty and the exhibition grounds. The communists knew that they would need a strong apparatus of terror to control the society. First, operational groups of the secret police and militia came to Lower Silesia in April of 1945. They took active part in falsifying the results of both the referendum of 1946 and the election of 1947. They also took active part in the repressive measures aimed at weakening the legal opposition and eradicating the anti-communist underground. One of the many repressive measures were the Penal Code and the Penal Code of the Polish Armed Forces, which enabled military courts to judge civilians accused of crimes against state. One of the most oppressive military courts was the District Military Court in Wrocław, which was linked to the spontaneous rebirth of partisan structures here in Lower Silesia, whose members were sentenced by this court. The secret police and militia terrorized not only partisans, but also the Catholic Church, with whom they confronted in 1949. Poles could still use very few liberties, and one of them was not the freedom of information. Information from outside the Iron Curtain came with smuggled books and magazines and newspapers, but also by the waves of Radio Free Europe that allowed people to see what exactly was happening behind the Iron Curtain. In 1956 began the awaited thaw. Nikita Khrushchev delivered his secret report in which he blamed Stalin for creating a flawed system. And Bolesław Bierut, the president of Poland, died in Moscow of a heart attack, which helped to speed up the process of change. The citizens of Wrocław felt dissatisfied with the current situation. Living conditions have deteriorated, there were food shortages, and the city landscape changed only a little since the fall of Festung Breslau. The citizens of Wrocław were mobilized in their dissatisfaction also by protests in Poznań that took place in June of 1956, when 100,000 people went to the streets to demand bread and freedom. Eventually, in 1956, the censorship eased. The authorities let out 35,000 of political prisoners. The culture began blooming, and Władysław Gomułka rose to power as seemingly the only person that could stop the riots and change the situation. We have come to the end of the second installment of our meetings with History Online. Thank you for being here with us today, and if you have any thoughts and comments, please share them with us below. And we hope we will see you next time, next month, when we will be talking about the everyday life of Wrocław citizens.